Namaste, my name is Amish Tripathi and I am the director of the Nehru Centre, London. Now, some may think of Nehru Centre as just this beautiful fine building, and it is a fine building, no doubt. We have a wonderful art gallery out here. We have an awesome auditorium on the first floor with a capacity of 100 to 120 people right here in the heart of central London in Mayfair. But the Nehru Centre is a lot more than this fine building. The Nehru Centre is also an online platform. We are available on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram and on YouTube. And so the Nehru Centre is actually wherever you want it to be. Of course, we'd love for you to come to the physical events that we organize out here when we do organize them. But do join all our online platforms as well. This is a hybrid world. We are going to have offline physical events and online events as well. So do join our online platforms and do keep giving us feedback of what you think of it. We'd love to host you out there. We'd love to hear what you think of our events, and do keep sending in your suggestions as well. We do keep imbibing and learning from the feedback that you give to us to give you programs that you guys might enjoy. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Namaste. Jai Hind. Namaste. As you just saw in the video that was just placed, my name is Amish Tripathi. I'm the director of the Nehru Centre, and we are launching a book today that is on a very, very topical subject. The pandemic is still not over, and we are discussing how India handled the pandemic. And if you do want to understand how India did it, you can't do worse. In fact, you can do no better than checking out this book that we're launching today on this platform, A Nation to Protect. And of course, we have the author of the book, Priyam Gandhi-Mody here. If she can be brought up on stage, please.
Thank you, Amish.
Hi,
Thank you for
Priyam.
having me.
Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful for this platform to be able to reach the audiences, your audiences,
Wonderful.
with this very pertinent message.
Let me get my fellow host Manoj Ladwa also up on stage, and then I will do the formal introductions of the both of you. If Manoj Ladwa can be brought up, please. Hi, Manoj, how are
Namaste,
you?
namaste, Amish, and namaste, Priyam as well. Good to see you
Wonderful.
both.
Okay, we are a Sarkari place, so I'm going to go through the formalities first, and then we can start our discussion. Priyam Gandhi-Mody, I must clarify, is no relative of Prime Minister Modi. Priyam Gandhi-Mody is a strategist specializing in political communications. She frequently writes political non-fiction, and this is her third book. She is a proud alum of the University of Delaware and Florida State University, having worked briefly at the capital in Tallahassee, and she now lives in Mumbai with her husband, son, and golden retriever. And my partner in crime at this event, Manoj Ladwa, is, of course, the chairman and CEO of India Inc. and the founder of the Indian event that takes place in the UK, India Global Forum. He is the Karta Dharta of that. So anyone who wants to speak out that, he's the man to contact and schmooze with. Manoj, pleasure to have you on this platform as well. And handing over the mic to you. You get to ask the first question to Priyam.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Amish, for that kind introduction. And Priyam, so lovely to see you, and so lovely to see you again. I have a very, very simple question. What on earth motivated you to write this study? Because it's full of facts, full of really, really interesting points of reference. But a lot of people would have said that, is this a bit premature? What drove you to sort of bring this out now?
Right. When this is the third year of the pandemic, and like all of us, like the rest of the world, I have been tracking the pandemic from the very beginning, and especially what transpired in India vis-a-vis the global situation. one of my first observations, and that still sticks with me, is that um, the way India handles the challenges of the pandemic, the various challenges that keep coming up day to day, is not really brought out in mainstream media, whether it is Indian media, whether it is global media. So it becomes very difficult to understand the magnanimity of the challenge and the magnanimity of the solutions. And that's kind of what led me to create some kind of a document that would that I can tell this story with. And obviously, it had to be from a top down approach because we want to understand how policy was framed during these challenging years and how it sort of trickled down to the last man on the ground. And with that, Amish, thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm not even related to the Gandhis. I just want to make it clear.
You are actually a great symbol of national integration. But sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So yes, so that's that's why this document, that's how this document came along. And and I like to say that although my name has made it to the cover of the book, it takes a village, and so many people have contributed with information, with advice, including our honorable Prime Minister. So we have a lot of great perspectives from him as well. About the challenges, about how we, overcame some of those challenges, and that's what makes this book very special.
Priyam, if I may jump in on a question, because I was reading an article in The Economist uh,
Yeah.
some time back where they drew back to the last great pandemic, which was the Spanish flu. And they mentioned that the greatest death toll during the Spanish flu was actually in India. This was, of course, as I'm sure the viewers are aware, in that period between 1918 to 1921, if I remember correctly. And the greatest proportion of the death toll was actually in India. And The Economist had mentioned in the article that perhaps the name of Spanish flu should be changed, maybe British Raj era flu or something like that, because the state did not do that much. They didn't do a lockdown. They didn't do anything actually. Uh, but there is this view that did the in the present COVID situation, in terms of lockdown, did the state overdo it? Right, during the British Raj, if you want to call it Spanish flu or the British Raj flu, whatever, the state did nothing, and so many people died. There's this view that the state overdid a lockdown, a sudden lockdown, uh, which caused a lot of dislocation, which caused a lot of misery. Uh, do you think that was an overreaction? What's your analysis on this?
So Amish, when we've been sort of fortunate with the first wave of the pandemic, in the sense that it hit us much later than it hit many other countries. So we were able to observe what was happening in some of those countries, parts of Europe, US, Iran, UAE. It came to us after that. So we had been observing the situation very closely. Now, not many people know this, but the Indian intelligence already knew from September and October of 2019 that something was going on in China. And we had been tracking this very closely.
Oh,
Plus, we were tracking what was happening in these other countries. So we were very well prepared to take preemptive measures. Now, unlike some of the other countries, including the UK, we did not rely on one modeling team or one model. We consulted over 10 modeling teams from within India and from outside India.
so there wasn't an
And
equivalent of the UK SAGE group, where it's one group which gets
there
a
was,
consensus on
but
the model, or sorry, please go ahead.
you're right. So there was, but it wasn't just one model that they created that we relied on.
Okay.
We took opinions and numbers from at least 10 different models and 10 different models.
And when did this
So
start? Sorry, Priyam, if I just step in. When exactly did this start? this coming together of information and these different groups?
So our principal scientific advisor, Dr. Vijay Raghavandan, and Dr. V.K. Paul had started meeting, to figure out all of this in the end of January.
Okay.
So that was much, much earlier than even before we got our people back from Wuhan.
Okay.
That was about a week earlier than we got our people back from Wuhan.
All right.
So they had started meeting one-to-one. Then they started putting a group together and speaking with the PMO and then various modeling groups to kind of figure out the worst case outcome. And when we had solid numbers and we had some sort of numbers from these various models that kind of showed that if we don't take strict, stringent, preemptive measures, we're not going to be in a very good place. Because, see, remember, we didn't have any tools that any country needs to fight a pandemic. By tools, we mean masks, PPE kits, testing kits, information about the virus, vaccines, good healthcare infrastructure. We didn't have any of that. So we needed to augment all of that very, very quickly. And even if we had some of it, we had some of it in the urban area. So it became very, very important to keep our people where they are in the urban areas for at least a few weeks until the government was able to augment capacities in the rural and semi-rural areas.
But if I can just come in here, one of the lasting images or memories of the first wave was the exodus, that tragic, terrible exodus of migrant workers from urban areas into rural areas. So how does that fit in with, this whole objective of trying to keep people and keep it contained within the urban areas? Because you saw this exodus. What was the cause of that?
So there are two kinds of migrants who come to the cities to work. There are long-term migrants, and then there are short-term migrants. The short-term migrants are usually people who are brought into the cities, for contract labor and that kind of work. They don't even have homes, so which is why they don't have a good social ecosystem even. So when the national lockdown got announced, about a week or 10 days before that, most of our states had gone into several different kinds of lockdowns and curfews. So their wages had kind of already stopped for about a week, 10 days for most of them. And when the national lockdown got announced, which they kind of realized that we don't have a home in the city, the contractors have sort of left us, we have no wages. So how do we stay here? Even though the government is saying we'll give you food, but there's no security of home, especially when there is a new virus, especially when there are rumors that if you get infected, you're going to die. So that fear that we are going to get infected, we are going to die, we don't have an ecosystem, to go to the hospital if we, or get good medical treatment if we get infected. So all of these fears sort of led them to take to the streets. Now, what happened politically? That several opposition leaders kind of, instigated some of these people, and sections of the media instigated some of these people by showing constant images of people walking on the streets. So even those people who wanted to stay in the cities and listen to the national, to the center, that stay where you are, even they thought that if our fellow migrants are leaving, maybe we're doing something wrong by staying. So then they took to the streets as well. So it was very irresponsible messaging by some sections of the media and obviously some sections of the political opposition.
And sorry, Amish, if just one final point on this. And you mentioned, you've alluded to fake news and that spreading of rumors and so on. What role, what's your assessment of social media and how social media, did it help on balance or did it hinder on balance in the first wave? Where would you say social media and
So I
activity?
think, so I certainly think that social media and regular media played a very, very important role in passing on, communicating the nature of the virus, COVID appropriate behavior, government schemes, all of these important messages that needed to be penetrated to the people. Even our Hindi film industry, people from the industry, people from the radio community, they all played a very important role in helping pass on these messages to the last man, because we are such a diverse country. But there were some mischievous elements. There are, loyalists even in the media that want to create trouble, and it's this section that really sort of instigated all of it, and plus obviously the sensationalism that is attached to the media, that like sadness is sexy somehow. So just seeing people sort of go and suffer and on the road, it just captured the attention of the of people, and that's what the media kept running.
Yeah, misery sells, sadly. Um, I had a question on this. I am devout. I do follow my faith seriously, but there's this thing that came up, this narrative that came up that on the Hindu side the Kumbh Mela, on the Muslim side the Tablighi Jamaat, that these were super spreader events from where COVID spread a great deal. I am, of course, deeply religious, but I do believe, I mean, and I'm sure, as would all reasonable people, that religious rituals can be put on hold when you have a once in a lifetime pandemic like this and human life is at stake. But what did your analysis say of this? And each different sections of the media have different biases. Some sections have a bias against Muslims, some sections have a bias against Hindus, and depending on which section was speaking, either the Kumbh Mela or the Tablighi Jamaat would get blamed.
Yeah, yeah. So with the Tablighi event, see, we have to realize that it happened very early on in the pandemic, when most people didn't have a lot of information about the virus. Whatever they were getting was from watching the news about what was transpiring in other countries. If you remember, we were seeing videos from hospitals in Lombardy where they had to choose
Yeah,
between who to save and who to not. So there was an atmosphere of
fear.
fear. Okay. Now that's when the Tablighi event was happening. Now, just before the Tablighi event was happening in Delhi, about 3 weeks before that, 2 weeks before that, there was the same community had another event in Malaysia, I think, and there also it turned out to be a super spreader sort of an event. Those people sort of came in, and a lot of overlapping guests were there at the Tablighi event in Delhi. Okay, having said that, um, the police, the government, they constantly try to maintain communication, with the leadership, that you need to, you need to let go of these people. Now you have to realize it wasn't like a 3-day event or a 4-day event. It was like a rolling sort of an event where preachers would come, they would spread to parts of the country, try to sort of like a membership drive sort of a thing, try to preach, in different parts of the country, come back to Delhi, go back to other parts of the country again. So it was like a rolling crowd. So if there were people infected in the building, they were not only infecting the people within the building, but the people who were leaving to go to the other parts of the country to preach, they were taking the virus to these parts of the country. So it became very important to get these people out, to get them tested and isolated at that point in time. But because there wasn't enough information of the virus, there was a lot of resistance from the community towards what the government was asking them to do. Um, Obviously, the narrative in the media was just sort of built up, and the community sort of communal tensions started, playing out. And at some point, it got so tense that, again, there was fear that there might be stone pelting, there might be violence in that area. That's when the Prime Minister stepped in, and that's when the National Security Advisor, you know, went to the masjid to to sort of convince Maulana Saad that you please need to let us take the people, isolate them, and get them tested. This is in interest. This is in the best interest of the country. So that's so in terms of the Tablighi event, that's when the Prime Minister stepped in. Now let's talk about the Kumbh. See, communal finger pointing people don't usually forget. So while people pointed fingers at the Tablighi event for spreading the virus during the first wave, it sort of reciprocated when the second wave came around, when the Kumbh Mela took place. Now, you have to remember that the Kumbh Mela, as Amish, you probably know that the Kumbh Mela usually sees, 10, 11, 12 crore people on the days of the Shahi Snans. But this time, only about 10 lakh people. And this
Tiny
is from
proportion.
data from, very tiny proportion, this is from the mobility data that is available, of the cell phone networks and hotel reservations and public transport, etc. So very tiny proportion of the people attended it, but the photography and the videos were so dramatic, so creatively shot that it was shown to be this sea of people just crowding in the, crowding and spreading the virus. So it's sort of like, so the finger pointing started towards the Hindu community. Now, to to prove my point that the is not where the virus started spreading, the second wave originated. It is actually the farmers' protest, which happened way earlier in December, and in January. At the peak of the farmers' protests, we have data from the states, from Haryana, Punjab, Delhi, that the decline of the curve of the first wave stopped in January in these areas, in Delhi, Punjab, Haryana.
Punjab, Haryana, Delhi.
Yes,
In
the
Punjab, Haryana,
decline.
Delhi at that time. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So the
They were
decline
the
stopped
they
and
were
it
the
started.
yeah. Then there was a plateau for 2 weeks, and those are the three states where the upward growth of the wave started for the second wave in sometime in February. So we have data that shows that it's the farmers' protests, and the rolling crowd at the farmers' protests that sort of started that is the advent of the second wave in the country. And then, of course, in Maharashtra, there was a new variant, the Delta, and that kind of had its own life. Um, we also knew at that point through genomic sequencing that the alpha variant was also spreading in Delhi, Punjab, Haryana, along with the original variant. So the possibility of mutation was also very high. So what I'm trying to tell you is that our scientists and our task force, our COVID task force, had all of this information going in. And if they stopped an event like the Kumbh, religious sentiments are so important. There was pandemic fatigue. Only 10 lakh people came in, and those people are, the seers, the saints, the religious leaders. So consider the alternate situation. What if the government had banned the Kumbh? These guys, they come out, of their meditation and mats only for the Kumbh Mela. They would have still come because it's spiritual cleansing for them. And then what would the government do? Like use police to stop them from the Shahi Snan. How would that look? There was no way of winning this.
No,
Yeah,
the suns actually you can't even contact normally because they're in the Himalayas and the Kumbh Mela things are decided by an ancient calendar. Sorry, Manoj, go ahead.
yeah. No, I think this is excellent cultural context, and those people that are watching this, especially that are living outside of India, often don't get this type of perspective and this type of cultural understanding. It just seems to be a very monolithic, homogeneous sort of approach to assessing where things are. But this obviously underlines how complex and sensitive a country like India is. And your other point, I was like gripped at listening to you about your assessment that the real super spreader was the farmers' protests. And I remember at the time, and we had our own different political views on the protests themselves. But I was aghast at how the farmers were being egged on to congregate in the way in which they were doing at a time of this pandemic. And that for me was extremely worrying. And now that you've been able, through facts and through your study, expose with data that this was a really uh, difficult or tragic um, epicenter for the pandemic and how it was dealt with. It's I think really useful to know. Um, I want to I want to come back to the whole conversation around communications, and we've talked about the role of the media, the plus and minuses of how social media. But overall, what's your assessment of how the national government communicated and state governments communicated over the course of the pandemic?
Um, so
And I'll
I
give you
think
the
that,
context. Sorry, Priyam. If I
yeah.
just give you the context, sitting here in the UK, we were used to every single day the chief scientific officer, the chief medical officer, along with the prime minister, or along with various ministers, coming out and making statements at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. History will tell whether that was effective, not effective, or whatever. But you're from a communications background as well, and I want to really understand your assessment of how do you think the government of India and the state governments did?
So I think we also similarly we also had a 3:30, 4 o'clock press conference that the health ministry, the Secretary of Health, and the Joint Secretary, usually Dr. V.K. Paul, who kind of led the task force. They would hold, first they started as a daily briefing, and then, of course, with the intensity of the virus and the effectiveness of the messaging spreading to the last mile, the frequency sort of reduced, but that really helped in combating misinformation. That again, that easily spreads in rural parts of the country, in regional media, even sometimes. So having this daily briefing in two languages sort of played a really important role in setting the facts right, at least.
Okay. Um, I want to now talk a bit about the economy, and there were politicians in India who were, you know, deeply critical of the way in which the government had handled. They felt the government went in too hard, too quickly on the lockdown, and we've talked about your analysis of that. And there was a comment once that, the government is, flattened the curve, but the wrong curve. And that what they meant by that was that it's the economy that has really suffered as a result of the way in which the strict measures were put in place to really sort of address the spread of COVID, but at the significant expense of the economy. And I know in your book you've dwelt a lot around the economy as well, and I'd like to get your view as to how you think the economy has been managed, or was managed, in the first couple of waves at least.
Right. So for many countries and for most countries, it was, really big challenge to decide where the fine line is between lives and livelihoods. Um, for India, our prime minister from the get-go said, "Jaan hai to jahan hai." So it was clear that we had to first manage to save lives. We just couldn't lose our people, and that lives were precious. Every single Indian life was
Yeah.
precious. Um, the impact of that obviously was a complete economic shutdown um, for the period of the lockdown until we slowly started to open up. And we did open up, like you rightly said, um, politicians like Mr. Gandhi, who were very active on social media, they did put up, these kinds of infographics that the government has flattened the wrong curve, um, which is not entirely true. The government did flatten the COVID curve as well. We did see a plateau of the COVID curve versus a peak. So, which was natural, right? Because if you shut down the economy, you are going to see uh, you're going to see a flattening of the economic curve. Anyway, so when we did kickstart, we used a modified barbell strategy. So what that means is that we didn't offer a one-time, high-impact, very expensive package, cash in hands. We didn't do that because we used money very, very judiciously. Um, we announced our packages in parts after getting feedback on the ground, so that we would see our money multiply manifold. Um, so another reason why we didn't give out, and there was a lot of criticism that why is India not giving out cash in hand to all Indians? Now, when we look at the countries that did give out cash in hand, and we also compounded with the Prime Minister's wisdom at that point in time, he said Indians are very different people. If you give them cash in hand, they will not use that cash. They will save that cash, which means that money will not go back into the economy to stimulate it, which is the purpose of giving out cash in hand. So, so we only gave out money via direct benefit transfers to the extreme vulnerable groups, but more so, we used money where we would have a multifold and manifold impact, multiplying impact of that money. For instance, we spent 300% more on infrastructure. Now, spending that much more on infrastructure would mean that you're creating that many new jobs, the entire ecosystem of the products that you'd need, in a particular construction project, you're stimulating that as well. Our agriculture spends went up significantly. So we did spend money very, very judiciously, and that's how we stimulated the economy. And the numbers are for everybody to see now. We sort of recovered really well. The IMF last week said that we may reach our $5 trillion economy vision by 2026, and by 2025 was one of the electoral promises of the Prime Minister. So we're not very far away from that.
So despite COVID, there is that
Despite
trajectory.
COVID.
And you mentioned direct benefit transfers, and on reflection, I think the Jan Dhan Yojana in particular, the banking Indian bank of 200 million or whatever bank accounts that were opened up over that very short period of time by the Modi government, and there was a lot of criticism at that time that you're opening up bank accounts and they have zero balancing balances. What's the purpose of that? I think COVID and the crisis management and how these direct benefit transfers went into those accounts underlines the importance of that particular drive and the foresight with which the government drove that. So, it's, sometimes when you assess schemes during the heat of the moment at that particular time and you think, oh, this is going to be a waste of time, a waste of money. But when you have a crisis or a situation like this, we actually saw the real benefit of this. So, and I feel that a lot of waste was cut out, and therefore the Nirmala Sitharaman and the Exchequer had a much, much more targeted approach than they would have, say, 5-10 years ago, if this crisis, God forbid, had happened at that particular time as well.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you guys, have been reading that recently, just a couple of days ago, I think there's been news that 100 and something $1 million have been siphoned off in the US when they gave out the cash in hand money. So that's not happened with us because our money went directly into the accounts of the beneficiaries and very, very quickly. There was no politics, like what happened in, for example, the US, but the governor said that give us the money and then we'll distribute it, or department said that, we'll distribute the money. It just literally went to the accounts, without any possibility of siphoning off or corruption.
Adding to the point that both Manoj and you made, Priyam, because from what I know, in many countries in the West, physical checks were actually sent. Uh, you can imagine the delay and the chances for leakage, corruption in that process. But yes, there was the criticism at that time that to build this entire infrastructure, the question of privacy. But at times you have to find a balance, because accounts were seeded with the mobile numbers, etc. Sorry, Manoj, if you have a question, or I wanted to actually discuss vaccines with her, but sorry, please go ahead.
No, you read my mind.
Okay.
I really wanted to talk about vaccines. Why don't you
Yeah.
ask your question?
Yeah,
And
so
I'll...
I've got one thing, because look, what we had was essentially Covishield, which is the UK AstraZeneca, and Covaxin, and from what data, despite all the criticism and the attacks, frankly racist attacks on these vaccines, they've turned out to have over time among the best efficacies. uh, Sinopharm not that much. And I read this recent scientific paper on. I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, these are pharma things; they should be studied by scientists. But that Pfizer is leading to a higher risk of heart attacks, particularly on males. This is recent data that has just come out. I don't know. It needs to be checked. I just read that. So, what's your sense on how the entire vaccine process happened, all the way from research, seeding, manufacturing, distribution, uh, the injections everywhere, the administration,
Right.
everything. Sorry, and Manoj, if you have anything to add on that.
No. I'm
Yeah.
fascinated to hear
Sorry, go ahead.
Priyam's views.
Right. So again, once again, not many people know this, but in April 2020, that is when the lockdown had sort of just begun, maybe a week or 10 days before, the Prime Minister held his first meeting on vaccine manufacturing / acquisitions. And in that meeting, he said that we all have to know and realize that science is going to win this war, this COVID war for us. So getting vaccines, getting them manufactured here, administrating them. He has been overseeing this process very, very closely from the get-go. Now, in that meeting, that was the first meeting. So he said to everybody present there that do what you have to do. Get the companies to manufacture their vaccines here, buy them as quickly as possible so that they can suffice all of our huge Indian population. Do what you have to do, but make sure that our people are protected as soon as possible. And after that, the talks with the pharma companies started. Serum Institute, as we know, was one of the early players to sort of close the deal with AstraZeneca to manufacture the AstraZeneca vaccine in India. But of course, the challenges that they had was that the raw materials that they needed for the vaccine, that Serum Institute needed for the vaccine, some of them came from many nations. Now, America, for instance, had an export ban on some of these materials. So the government of India had to work through, via back channel talks to help secure those. When they did the talks, the government of the United States said, what we'll do is that only for India and only for the list of products that you give us, we lift the ban or the ban stays. So, because of our friendship, of our deep friendship between the two countries, securing those materials in these large quantities became possible. The other thing is, and of course, this is not something that people anticipate, that the, the companies in the US or some of these other Western nations that make these raw materials are small scientific companies. They've never made raw materials in these kinds of quantities ever before. So they didn't have the machinery, they didn't have the manpower, they didn't have the finances. So our government had to also work with them so they could secure finances and machines and manpower to make enough raw materials that would suffice the Indian population. So it was an entire exercise. So this is how Serum Institute got to manufacture the vaccine in the quantity that would suffice us. Now, simultaneously, our vaccine task force, NEGVAC, they were also talking to some of these foreign manufacturers like Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Sputnik. While Johnson & Johnson and Sputnik agreed to tech transfer and manufacture in India, even at that point, it was looking like Pfizer was ahead in the race. So in our conversations with Pfizer, they said, you've agreed to a tech transfer with a company in China, Fosun Pharmaceuticals. So why don't we use the same model? We transfer the technology to one of our companies here in India, and we'll make the vaccines here. Pfizer said no. And so you have to remember that Pfizer has, we have other Pfizer products in India for a long time. Other pharmaceuticals that are marketed and distributed and made by Pfizer. However, when we made this request to them, they said, no, we are in a demand-heavy stage of the pandemic. So we're not going to do that. We'll have this conversation when we're heavy on the supply side. So basically when the heat of the pandemic goes down. So we said, fine, if you don't want to do a tech transfer, then we want to purchase the vaccines.
So they'll not give us the water when the house is on fire. Once the fire is out, then you can take the water and drown in it.
Yeah. So we said, fine. So you give us the vaccines, the made in, you make the vaccines and you give us the vaccines. We'll import them, but we need them in X quantities. So Pfizer said, okay, that's not possible. We have a database of countries wanting our vaccine. So we'll give you 5 crore vaccines in the year 2021. Now, if you remember, there were a couple of days where we vaccinated 5 crore people within 2 or 3 days in 2021. Yeah. So Pfizer wanted to give us 5 crore vaccines for the entire year, 2021. And that too, there was no guarantee. They said we could, it's possible that we'll miss this timeline. But if we miss it, now there are other terms, were that if we miss this timeline, you cannot hold us accountable. You have to give us sovereign immunity, which means that you have to make the payment regardless of when we give you the vaccines. And even if the pandemic has ended by then, you still have to take us. You still have to take the vaccines. You still have to pay for them, the price that we are deciding. And if you don't pay for them, the sovereign immunity that you provide us will enable us to take away one of your sovereign properties abroad. And not only that, they said you have to give legal indemnity to everybody in the supply chain. So not just to Pfizer, you have to give legal security to the transporters, the storage guys, the syringe makers, the whole chain. Okay. So if there's one bad batch or the whole batch is bad, there's nobody you can hold accountable and your sovereign properties are at stake. So this is not cool in any country's security interests. So that didn't work for us. So you remember during the second wave, there was this uproar that why don't we have Pfizer? Like why is the Modi government stopping Pfizer from coming to us and saving our people? So this is the background on that.
This is
Now those people should be asked, do you still want it?
no, Priyam. This is certainly a huge revelation for me, because I'm sure for Amish as well. I didn't know quite the intricacies of this, and this is the makings of a thriller movie, I think, around the battle for vaccines, the politics of vaccines, and then the vaccine diplomacy that was initiated by the Indian government. But I want to just try and sort of bring a few positive points that have come out around the vaccines. One was one thing that struck, one fact that struck me during this time of the vaccine drive was that there were days when India was vaccinating more people than the entire population of Australia. And I think Prime Minister Modi underlined that fact to the Australian Prime Minister when they spoke. And that's a big testimony to the public, and also the bureaucracy and the machinery. It's often criticized, but in this particular scenario, the rate at which vaccinations took place was something quite phenomenal. The other silver lining, or that emerged, and you've alluded to the AstraZeneca Serum Institute collaboration, that there have been deep and very meaningful long-term global collaborations that have happened where India has been at the epicenter of that, and that is, I think, opened up a lot of opportunities for India's pharmaceutical sector, and also its healthcare sector and healthcare professionals as well. So going forwards, I think there's something of an opportunity that has arisen. And lastly, last year when I hosted India Global Forum, we had the vaccines minister, Nadim Zarawi, who came and spoke. And afterwards, he said to me that, Manoj, the UK government and the cabinet were absolutely unaware of the amount of dependency that we have on India for basic medicines uh, such as paracetamol, and and that we didn't realize how much of a contributor to the world's pharmaceutical supply chain India was. We've talked about it in the past and so on, but I think this COVID crisis and this particular has underlined again the phrase that India is the pharmacy of the world, and so people's eyes have opened up to the opportunity as well as the contribution that India makes around the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And sometimes we underplay this, but COVID has been such a genius move. We usually get we are on the receiving side of the heat when the global media says that there is communal tension in India and blah blah blah. But COVID has been the great equalizer. You could be from any religion, any class, any background, live anywhere in the country, as long as you had a phone, or you knew somebody who had access to a phone or a computer, you had an equal chance at a shot than anybody else in the country. So, just having this technology, providing it to so many 71 other nations, I think. Free of cost, training them, that really is, the true testament of India's sort of giving and nurturing nature. And we've seen this through the vaccinating the world process that, right from the get-go, we've been saying that, there should be, IP should be waived on vaccine technologies, everybody should have an equal right at getting vaccinated. We are running the vaccine My Free program. We started it at the same time that we started giving out vaccines to our people, because we didn't believe in this hyper nationalism that was coming out of the rich parts of the world. So we really have maintained that stand that we are a giver, we are a provider, and we believe that the entire human race should have equal opportunity at life.
Yeah. I completely agree with you on the sheer brilliance of the Covin app. Uh, and those of the viewers who are from the UK may not have experienced it. You can't imagine how simple it is. And data was accessible online. You could just go on the web, and online you could see how much vaccination had happened, and to the time, like just 5 minutes back. Whereas data in even the richer Western countries was hard to come by, and good data leads to better decisions. Speaking of data, it brings us to the controversy that is kind of hot at this stage. The WHO numbers. I am a BSc Maths, and I've done banking and statistics. So the WHO numbers are honestly, from 2 million to 9 million is a ridiculous range. That's not really a range. Looks like a guess. Uh, but most other range estimates would be between few tens of thousands. This is a very broad range. But what do you think of their numbers and their estimates? So if you can shed some light on this.
Yeah. So when
That's about the
so
WHO
you,
number of deaths that happened. What WHO is estimating
of course.
number of deaths in India.
So so when you track this information, okay, it first started as information that was leaked to some sections of the global media, and only the India numbers were leaked. That
Oh,
India is delaying the release of the WHO report because, according to the WHO, there have been 5 million excess deaths in India. That was the exact material that was leaked to some sections of the global media. Um, Now, the model that they're basing the numbers on. Let's go a little bit into that before we look at the role of the media in this. Okay, the model that they're basing it on is Kalinski's model. Kalinski
okay.
has attempted to study all-cause mortality in Argentina based on numbers from one region, which is Cordoba. The reason they use this model is because they've studied the impact of the pandemic in the entire country vis-a-vis Cordoba, and they've said that since Argentina is a small country, we have seen that the impact of the pandemic was sort of similar in the entire nation as it was in that one region, which is why our model works. This is the disclosure that they make as a responsible scientific group in their paper itself. Now, the WHO has based the India model on this model, okay, and have complicated it further. Now, the other important thing is that the WHO has used numbers only from 17 states. Despite repeated requests from the Indian government, they have not disclosed which 17 states they have used to base their data on and run their statistical model on. So we don't know which states they're using. We also don't know which period of time have they taken the numbers from. They've studied it in the 2-year time frame, but what if they've taken numbers only from, say, March, April, and May, 2021, and then they've generalized it to the 2 years? That's not going to spit out, good numbers. So,
But Indian states also had peaks at different times, right?
of
Kerala had
course,
a peak at,
yes,
at Maharashtra had a peak at a different time. Delhi had a different
yeah,
time, and we're
yeah,
we're
which is
one fifth of
yeah, which is
humanity.
why
So yeah,
Kalinsky model doesn't work. And
okay.
this is a disclosure that they should have made in their report. Also, that this model only works if the national trajectory is the same, which is not true for India, owing to our massive geographic size, diversity, density of the population, the fact that COVID hit every, forget state, district
Yeah,
at
there were different
different
peaks.
times. Yeah, different peaks. So now the other problem also, and just to understand the bias of the report, is that while they say that they originally said that India had 5 million excess deaths. Then they went and self-corrected the numbers, and at this point, as it stands today, the interval is 1.4 million to 9 million. So now they are basically taking
Oh, so they
guarantee that
hang on. So
according,
I read in the papers of 2 to 9 million. So they had a different number earlier, and they've corrected that number now.
yeah, yeah, and now they've even further corrected it and said that we take guarantee for 1.4 million excess deaths in India, but it could be
But
9
it could be
million.
9 million.
Yeah. So what kind of science is this? And that
I
is
don't mean to
difficult
sound
to.
rude, but if there was a chief actually making such projections in a life insurance company, he'd be fired.
Yeah. Now, the other problem is that they categorized India as a tier two country. Now, the countries that they categorized as tier one, they basically took the data from them and said, okay, आप जो बोलोगे वो सही है, हम आपका data use करेंगे और मान लेंगे कि वो सही है. For tier two countries, they said, no, whatever data you're giving us, it's probably not accurate. Your data collection system is not good. So we are going to run our own models and decide.
So have
Now,
they declared the list of these tier one, tier two countries?
yes. So
I'm sorry, Priyam, your
Yeah,
voice
well,
broke up. If
this
you could just
voice is
repeat.
working.
Hello?
other countries in the tier.
Priyam,
We are
Can you hear
having
me,
trouble,
guys?
aren't we?
I'm afraid there's some internet trouble. Priyam, at your end, if you can hear us. Ah, now you're back. Priyam, Priyam, we lost you at the list of
Oh,
the tier one, tier two countries.
right. Okay. Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, great. So apart from India, the other countries in the tier two list are Argentina, Egypt, Indonesia, countries that are significantly smaller in size and in demography than India is. So it doesn't make sense. Plus, India has a very solid data collection system. It takes longer to collate our data, but it's there, it's reliable, and it's been working for decades. So there was no reason to run a statistical model, especially if it's going to spit out these kinds of numbers that you have to keep changing every other day. Now, what is suspicious and why this doesn't pass the smell test is because, according to the WHO report, the excess mortality in China is in the negative. Negative.
Oh, okay. But China said their death
Okay.
toll was 5,000, right?
Yeah. But according to WHO, it's in the negative. So
Oh,
basically, they are saying China has had lesser deaths in the pandemic than it has had in a non-pandemic year.
oh.
And China is in what, tier one or tier two, or tier of its own?
I mean, there's no data from there, so they,
There's no.
God knows how they've calculated that. But this is what they've been saying. Now, if you look at the global perspective of what is happening, is that when they leaked the India numbers about 4 weeks ago, several major cities in China were under very stringent lockdowns, including Shanghai. Okay, their zero COVID policy was not working. Citizens were crying for help because they weren't getting food. Children were dying hungry, sleeping hungry in apartments. People were probably dying. Who knows? Okay, but this was the situation when these numbers were leaked. So this seems like the report.
Priyam, I'm sorry.
We've
I
lost her
think
again.
you've lost her again. Internet troubles. These things happen.
Amish,
First,
this is absolutely startling.
it's startling.
Some
It's
of
startling,
the
and this is
revelations that Priyam has shared with us
yeah.
across this. We've been speaking for the last hour or so, and I think we could carry on
We
a
could
lot
carry
longer. She
on
seems to have a lot of
long as
data
soon
and
as she
information.
Yeah, so no, as soon as she comes back, one of the things that we could do, because we were going to do that at the end of the program to kind of show the book, because you unwrap the book, right, at the end of a program, and we're going to do it online. But as soon as she comes back, we'll play that video. But Manoj, coming back, I think you've hit the nail right on the head because if it's a range of 1.4 to 9 million and they're changing their numbers repeatedly, I mean, it means nothing. Uh,
I was
Stunned.
I recall that age-old saying of "There's lies, damn lies, and statistics," and but the worrisome fact is that there are global institutions that operate uh, on really shaky statistical grounds, and that has been taken as fact and gospel, whereas countries like India, which have you know a pretty robust system of gathering data and disseminating, and we've alluded to how technology is now, whether it's a direct benefit transfer scheme or CoWIN, have really revolutionized the way in which governance takes place in India. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to have clear and clean data to be able to execute. And so what Priyam's saying is that I guess there's a lag in the mindset of some of these global policymakers and opinion formers to where India may have been and where it has traveled over the last few years. And I'm sure there's many more such nuggets in her book that really do need to come out and be properly discussed.
Couldn't agree
Um,
more, Manoj. In fact, I would think this book, if it can be converted into a documentary, into things which are easier to absorb, this would be extremely insightful because it would also be useful for other countries to learn. I mean, India would love to share its, and there have been mistakes we made. There are things that we've got right, and if only when we share. Practices and knowledge can all of us emerge stronger. This is a once in a lifetime pandemic. Nobody had any idea how to handle this. You
yeah.
can't have plans for something like this. Manoj, I also got a message that her internet has stopped working completely. There's
Oh
some
gosh, I
issue
would
out
say
there,
so.
so perhaps she may not be able to come back on. So how about if then you and I do the launch honors by ourselves
No,
and
we should, and
in honor of Priyam?
absolutely,
And
and for the viewers that have been watching and those that will see the recording later on, I was actually going to extend an invitation for Priyam to join us in the week of 26th of June when we host India Global Forum in UK India Week, where you can meet her in person
yeah,
and take this discussion forward, because I think she'll be an absolute star, and her book will be something that many people will want to pick up and really understand. So,
yeah.
but let's do this virtual
Yeah.
launch of
So the virtual launch. So the tech team, if you can just play that video, please. The virtual launch of the book. Hopefully, Priyam will get to watch it as soon as her internet comes back on.
and how climate friendly, how environmentally friendly was that?
Right.
Rather than ripping up a piece of
No,
paper and
no paper was ripped up. No trees were harmed in that launch video. And but couldn't agree more with you. I think Priyam's book, her insights were fascinating. There's so much more to learn about how India faced this pandemic. Of course, all countries were hit badly by this pandemic. It's a once in 100 year event. It began in Wuhan. It's hurt all of us, and hopefully, we are coming to the end of this. I think China is the only place where it still remains alive. Hopefully, China will also come out of it soon. Humanity needs to get out of this and move ahead and work at the longer term tasks of the environment, of poverty reduction. things which are as critical. Manoj, thank you so much for coming on to the Nehru Center platform from your
Pleasure.
taking time out of your very very busy schedule. And Priyam, I hope you do get to watch this again as soon as your internet comes back on. But we're going to applaud loudly enough. Oh, okay, lovely.
There we are.
Priyam,
Thank you.
unfortunately you missed the video because Manoj and I had to keep the show going. So we got talking
Of
to each
course.
other, and you missed the
Yes.
launch video, but you can see that
Okay.
when you get you can
You are
watch it.
launched in the
Yeah.
UK now,
Yeah.
and
Oh, yay.
I've,
Thank you.
I've
Apologies
ex-
for that tech glitch.
I was about to say that we'll clap loud enough so that you could hear it in India even without the internet.
no,
How
but
sweet. No, but this was a great conversation. Thank you guys for hosting and being such a lovely host.
and
And
we're
Manoj had
expecting
something
to
to tell
see.
you.
Yes,
Okay.
and so look, we've been absolutely gripped by your findings and the analysis that you've provided, and I wanted to extend a big invitation for you to come and join us at India Global Forum at the end of June in person, and we can have a much more detailed discussion with many other people, because I believe that the facts and the analysis that you've put together really does need to be shared with opinion formers around the world. So it's an invitation to you, and I hope you'll be able to accept that at the end of and see you.
Absolutely, I will. I will be there, and it will be an honor to to be there and talk about the country. An absolute privilege
Fantastic.
on your forum.
Thank you.
So
Wonderful.
I will see both of you end of June then.
Indeed.
Wonderful. All right. You take care, Priyam. Thank you so much for coming here. Manoj, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and hosting this, co-hosting this. Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank
Jai
you.
Hind.
Jai Hind.
Bye.